So I got most of this side of the bumper. This would be the passenger side of the bumper. Mostly ground smooth with the 4.5-inch grinder and the flap wheel. So I've got a little bit more to do over here. I've already worked on some of this large seam, then I got to grind down these little welds here where we filled in the bumper bolts. So I'm making progress on here. I'll finish up using the angle grinder there, then I'll come in with the DA sander and smooth it all out and try and rough up the chrome as much as possible so I can get some paint to stick to this. Well, I've hit both sides of this bumper with the angle grinder and that's a 40 grit flap wheel on there. So now I'm going to hit it with my electric DA sander. I've got a 60 grit pad on there right now, which you'd think that's pretty aggressive, and it is if you were sanding on a piece of wood or something like that. But on metal, it's really not that aggressive. And of course, this thing moves pretty slowly, so you're really not removing that much material. But I do have a few high spots that I need to take down, and so far I found this to be about the best way to do it. It's slow, it's tedious, but it does do a pretty good job. So I'm gonna get started on this, and then we'll shoot some more video. Well, I'm pretty happy with how I've got these welds smoothed out. So really all I need to do now is kind of come in and scuff up the rest of this chrome so that paint will actually stick to it. It's really not a tricky process, painting chrome. You got to scuff it pretty good so that you get a little bit of tooth in there for the paint to stick to. Other than that, there's really no trick to it. So I got a couple areas here I'll have to use some filler primer just in a rattle can, as I mentioned before, to kind of fill in some of these low spots here. But that shouldn't be too big of a deal. So I'll get this thing scuffed up and then we'll start working on some paint. Grinding on the bumper is finished up. I put the DA sander on there and I've got it pretty well smoothed out. So basically what I'm doing now is I'm just wiping it down with some denatured alcohol, and then I'm going to put some of this Duplicolor self-etching primer on there just as my first coat. And then what I'm going to come back and do is with some filler primer, spray some of these areas and wet sand this smooth so I can fill up some of these low areas. They're really not that low, and like I mentioned before, I really hate using body filler. So I think just a spray can filler primer should cover up these areas just fine. So let me wipe this down a little bit more and then put a coat of paint on it. So I've got the outside of the bumper fully coated with the self-etching primer. Now I just need to just turn the bumper over, spray the backside with the self-etching primer, and then flip it back over and start squirting it with the filler primer. And then I'll be able to wet sand that down, get a lot of these little low spots covered up, and then we'll be ready to put our top coat on there. Sprayed the bumper with a few coats of filler primer, and I spaced out my coats about 15 to 20 minutes in between coats, and I actually let it dry for several days, and that was really just because I didn't have time to come out here and work on this. So it was thoroughly dried up, and I've gone ahead and I've wet sanded it, and I used 400 grit sandpaper and just a little squirt bottle full of water. So I want to show you guys a couple areas. This is one little area kind of right in the center, right above the license plate, that had a couple little nicks in it, and that's just from wear. And you can see the olive drab paint, that was the self-etching primer that I put on there first, and then of course all the little kind of red oxide paint, that's the filler primer, and you can see it filled up those holes. And this area is finished. It will get another coat of primer just to cover it up because there is some bare metal there, but otherwise that spot is finished. Same over here, there was a couple nicks in the bumper just from age, just from use. This area not quite finished. I can still feel some little divots, but you can see the same thing, bare metal, the olive drab self-etching primer, and then of course the red oxide, the filler primer in the little holes there. So it's working out real well. It's also working out real well in the areas that I butt welded together when I welded this piece of bumper back to this section of bumper. So that's all coming out real well. The holes, the factory bolt mounting holes, those are getting covered up real well. So I do need to put a few more coats on here to cover up a few more little blemishes, another round of wet sanding, and then I should be ready for my color coat.